So last night I was reading this verse 14 from Luke chapter 8, and it just so happened to co-occur with a fairly recent pair of end-of-year summary and New Year resolutions from a prominent and well-known person. I don't want to mention that person's name, even though there is a minor chance that he might see this video. This would be an increment of improvement that's too great for him to handle at this point. And that's unfortunate because his life is well known enough, public enough, that this would be a pretty rich example to learn from. But it would be a negative example, as in things to avoid. So we'll just keep him anonymous. Anywho, so this person posted all these things that he's achieved this year. And it's impressive. From a material perspective, it's impressive. But also his work could be seen as helping people. And again, I'm just staying as general as I can. And the only reason, it's not just to protect him from an invitation towards improvement that he's not yet willing to accept, but it's also the more general this example is, the easier it will be to apply to your own life. And that's the real point of this video. So I invite you, as we're going through this, to think about how this might apply to you, because I promise you that there are aspects of your life where you're holding back from God in ways that might not be perfectly visible to you, but they will be as we talk about them. And they affect you and they affect the people around you. And so I'm going to encourage you literally to impart courage to you in standing taller to more fully follow the instructions and example of Jesus Christ. Okay, so back to Luke 8:14. I was looking over this person's accomplishments for this year and his goals for next year. Those were two separate posts. And I thought to myself, not one thing on these lists would be possible if he had not, the language we're going to use is what the scriptures use, if he wasn't ashamed of the word of God. Now let me tell you what I think about that. But let's get into Luke. So this is verse 14 of chapter 8. And this is from the parable of the sower. But I just want to read this one verse. You can go back and read the whole thing if you'd like, but you're probably already familiar with it. And that which fell among thorns are they which, when they have heard, go forth and are choked with cares and riches and pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. Now we have to break this down, and in order to do this efficiently, I'm going to have to artificially constrain some of the ideas that are referred to here. And I will invite you to go to upwardthought.org and look up some of these words for yourself to see what I've said about them in the past. But just briefly, the first thing I want to talk about is the word. That's what they've heard. They've heard the word. That's like that song, The Bird is the Word, which I won't sing to you right now, but that comes to mind. They've heard the word. What is the word? It's not just things that you say or read. Words are ideas, and it gets even deeper than that. So Paul talks about how the only way we can hear the gospel is if the gospel is preached. Well, a much better, it's not better, let me backtrack. A very important way that we can, quote, hear the word is to have it demonstrated to us. Jesus Christ is the Word. Before the earth was created, he was the Word, and he was with God, and he was God. That's from John chapter 1. So he is the demonstration of what the Father would be if the Father were here. That's his mortal life was exactly what the Father would do as a mortal man. It's his character, it's his nature, it's what he thinks, it's what he feels, it's what he does. The word is every choice of God. And why? It's the what, it's the why, it's all of this. It's our example to follow. And so from this perspective, it could also be thought of as an invitation to think, feel, or do differently than you otherwise would. It's to be better. It's to improve. Improve yourself, improve everything around you. It's to be more like God. Okay? So that's what's being heard. And the seed that fell among the thorns are they who hear that invitation and they go forth, but they're choked with the cares and riches and pleasures of this life and bring no fruit to perfection. So what does it mean? What does it look like to be choked with cares and riches and pleasures of this life? Well, if you've ever planted anything from seed, you know that when a seed sprouts, it's just a little sprout. And sprouts usually come out pretty strong. If you've ever done, like, beans are really good for this. You can do a project with a little child and you can soak some beans in water and then you put them in a jar with or without dirt, and then they can see the sprout coming out of the bean. And at first, it's a vibrant, thick shoot. But what happens is, in the subsequent time frame, it becomes quite sensitive, and the sprout will thin out. And it's at this point that things start to go wrong. And that's when it becomes very important for the plant to be in a good environment. That there is sufficient water, but not too much water. That there's sufficient light, but not too much light. That there's sufficient heat, but not too much heat. And if these conditions aren't within the range of where they need to be, then what happens is the plant gets very thin, it dries out, it shrivels up, it dies. If you've ever planted a tomato from seed, tomatoes need a lot of light. And if you don't give them enough light, they get leggy, which means that they grow into these really thin and tall stalks. And the problem with that is it's too frail to support any weight. And even if you nurse it through, if it's too skinny, it'll never recover. And you can't have fruit on a skinny plant. It'll never even get that far because it can't even take the weight of the leaves, which are the next phase of growth. So with people, we grow towards God through our reactions to invitations to improve. These are opportunities to do and be better than we did or were before. The cares and riches and pleasures of this life all inhibit our willingness to fully emulate Jesus Christ, to truly do with full heart, might, mind, and strength what we sincerely believe he would in our place, to sincerely feel how he would in our place, to think as he would. So what are our motives? What are our beliefs? What are our desires? All of these things are wrapped into this. And you know what? We're all a lot smarter than we think in some ways. In some ways, we're a lot dumber than we think. And we tend to focus on this, which is probably good. But there's another side of this coin. It's very important to see ourselves as we really are. And in a lot of ways, we don't do that. But keeping this focus to intelligence, often we think that we're a lot dumber than we are. And you might not be actively thinking to yourself, gee, how can I deviate from the example of Jesus Christ today? Gee, how can I do less than he would? How can I feel worse than he would? How can I think more poorly than he would? What beliefs are true that I can manipulate into something less true and follow that instead? No one thinks that way. And yet, almost everyone does this almost every day. Now, let me explain what I mean. You know, since you were a very little child, you've been trained every day to anticipate how other people will react to what you do or don't do. You did this so thoroughly that you probably don't even think about it, except in rare cases today. You know, you might have a situation from time to time where you think, if I go to the right, this is what the person I'm in front of will do. And if I go to the left, this is what they'll do. You have these options before you, and you might actually think, well, especially if you're in sales, if I do this, they'll be more likely to do what I want them to do. If I do this other thing, they'll be more likely to do this thing I don't want them to do. And you make your choice. But what you don't realize is those calculations are happening inside of you subconsciously all the time. It's just like, do you have to think about breathing? Probably not, unless you're running really fast. It's just the rare cases where it's not your normal situation that you have to think about it. Do you have to think about walking? Probably not, unless you had a stroke or something, right? Why? Because you walk all the time. It's subconscious. It's driven deep into you through years and years of practice. Well, do you think it's any different for your expectations of how other people are going to react? You are primed over years of training to constrain how you think, how you feel, and how you act. Just to make it totally clear, it's not just what you do and don't do. You are primed to limit how you feel and how you think based on how other people will react. Do you not believe me? Do you think that there are situations, let's say that you're a young single person, are there situations where you have to hide how you really feel about someone, even if you really, really, really like them? Well, of course. If you see a random person on the bus and you confess your undying love at first sight to them, that's not going to go well, right? Or you could take it the other way. Let's say you hate somebody's guts. You have been trained since you were a young child to hide that. Now, whether there's merit in this ever, or whether it's always bad, is not my point that I want to make today. My point is that in many cases, these subconscious filters actually encourage you to do evil. Whether that's actively through doing bad things, or whether it's through omitting good things. And I think the omitting good things is probably a better one to spend more time on today. So, what are the motives for these filters? It says right here, the cares and riches and pleasures of this life. What's the effect of the filter? It says right here, bring no fruit to perfection. We're going to dive a little deeper into that. But let's just make sure we squeeze the juice out of the motive first. A lot of times you feel or think or act differently than Jesus would in your place, according to your understanding. So let me say that better. A lot of times you think and feel and act differently than Jesus would in your place, according to your understanding, simply because you know, again, probably subconsciously, that the temporal things in your life will not go well if you fully live up to the example he's given. Now, we have to make this explicit because Christianity has been so warped by people over time that we actually have to explicitly state, if you follow the example of Jesus, you can expect to be treated the way he was. This idea that Jesus suffered so we don't have to is absolute rubbish. He led the way so we could follow in the way. When we follow his example, it will go for us as it did for him. And the closer we are, the closer our experience will resemble his. And that's why there's a conflict. That's why the word is choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of this life, because they're contradictory to one another. Now, that doesn't mean that we use suffering as a beacon necessarily. We don't manufacture it artificially. There's plenty of real suffering in the way. You don't have to look for it. But we do have to avoid staying out of the way or leaving the way, because we are trying to protect our riches and pleasures and how we'll seem to others. Now, back to this individual, he makes lots of money. He's worked like a maniac for many years to get to where he is, and that's good. It's admirable. He's risked a lot to get there. And yet, the riches that he derives from the things that he does and the fame that he has because of the things he has done, he would lose it all in a minute if he lived up to what his intelligence has the ability to understand. In other words, he's used his intelligence to extract riches and pleasures, but he stopped short of doing what God would do in his place, because he has all sorts of things that he will absolutely not think, because he knows where it will lead to. And he has absolutely a lot of things that would absolutely destroy it. I'm not saying this well. If there are things that are shut off from him being able to be concerned about them. That's the feelings component. He refuses to look into things. He refuses to have a position on things that he knows will be too controversial for him to maintain his status in society. And because of that, he will never say anything about those things. He'll come up so far, but he'll stop. I would go so far as to say he's probably confronted with things like this every single day. And every single day he turns away because the word is choked with cares and riches and pleasures of this life. And so what does it mean to not bring fruit to perfection? The idea of fruit, that's something we could talk about for a long time. Again, you could search that. Perfection, you've probably heard other people talk about. It's to come to the complete purpose of, or the fullness of. It's to realize the potential of. That's the scriptural meaning of the word. So fruit to perfection, it's to grow all the potential that you have to its fullest extent. Potential to be as good as you can be and to do as much good as you could. This is worth pausing on for a minute, because many times those subconscious limitations, they become conscious limitations, and we'll realize that we're holding back. And you know what happens? One of the primary defenses to this is, but I'm doing so much good, and I wouldn't be able to do that good if I went full bore, if I really lived up to what I actually think and feel, and I really did what aligns with that. There is a time and a place for strategy, but it is so dangerous to make this excuse. You need to realize you're walking on a ledge, and it's a ledge that regularly crumbles. Be extremely careful. Most people don't have deep enough honesty to navigate that ledge well. And so you see this all the time with people who, for example, will stay in a church that they don't believe the central tenets of. And they say, but I'm doing good. I'm persuading people to be better than they would. Are you? Where's the fruit? Where's the fruit? In the best case, the only thing you can do is help people to derive the maximal value of the system that you have come to not believe in. And that's probably highly limited. Really, your fruit could probably only be measured in the number of people that leave the church that you won't because of what you've said or done. Does that make sense? And so if all you're doing is having people tolerate what you say from time to time, you're not doing much good at all. And most of the time, the fruits of that kind of work, we'll say, that performance, that's a better word, because you're being dishonest. You're putting on a show. The fruits of that performance are usually non-existent. What's the real result of what you're doing? And notably, what you're not doing. So more often than not, the real reason for doing something like that is you're comfortable where you are and you don't want to change. That's the real reason. There are so many costs, unseen costs to that kind of performance. You just don't realize the tentacles of dishonesty. They run through your life in ways that you can't trace. It's only after you get rid of it that you see just how far it affected you in ways that were outside of your control. This is the button that you push or don't push. But what happens afterwards will it spreads out far beyond what you think it would. And this is one reason why it's worth losing riches and pleasures of this life. Because what you gain is so much more than that. Maybe that's a good place to transition here. Well, the final point is you'll never get to the completion of your potential. You'll never even get close while you're holding yourself back by not doing what God would do, not feeling how he would feel, and not thinking how he would think. If you're holding back because you're afraid of what other people will do or not do, then you will never get even close to your potential. Your potential is denominated in the character of Christ. To the extent you turn away from any of that, you're turning away from the good that you could do and be, and consequently from the joy that you could have. So now let's transition to Mark 8. So this will start the story here where Peter rebukes him because Jesus starts describing the kind of suffering he's going to have to go through and why. He says in verse 31, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." I want to pause here. I should talk about this for much longer than I can right now, but it was vital for all of the leaders to reject him. Do you see the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, all three contingents of the leadership had to reject him. That was part of his mission. And there are many reasons for that. And again, we can't get into it. But the point here is that part of his mission was to be rejected. And not just rejected by the common people. And so consequences are going to come with that. In this case, he told Peter that he would be killed. So often coming back to well, I need to stay quiet, or I need to not do what I would otherwise do, or I need to just color within the lines, because otherwise I can't do the good that I'm doing. Coming back to that argument. Very often, it's at least as important to God that your example is rejected as it is when it's accepted. And that's something that's not commonly understood. You know, it's much easier for God to find someone who's willing to be accepted. And he says, I have a mission. Who wants to go on it? Everyone's going to listen to you, or you'll be showered with evidence that you're doing good that's received by and valued by others. And all the hands go up. But when he says, someone has to go and be an example of how I am to a people that will reject them and hate them for it, far fewer people say, here I am, send me. You look at when Isaiah was, the description of Isaiah's calling in the book of Isaiah. And God basically says, I need a volunteer. Isaiah says, here I am. And he says, what do you want me to do? Of course, I'm paraphrasing all this. And God says, well, you need to go to a very hard-hearted people, and they're going to reject you. And you're going to just show them again and again and warn them again and again, and no one's going to listen to you. And eventually, Jerusalem will be destroyed because they reject the warning and they're terrible people. And Isaiah says, well, how long do I need to preach? And God says this really ornamental language about until the cities crumble kind of a thing. I could pull it up, but you can look it up. He basically says, well, it's going to be longer than you want it to be, and it's going to be terrible. And it doesn't say anything in the text, but you can sort of imagine Isaiah's countenance just falling when he's hearing this, like, oh, great, what did I sign up for? And again, I'm being quite free with imagining all of this, right? But you can put yourself in that sort of situation and think about it. God has all kinds of people he can send into situations that have positive feedback. But there are very few people that trust him enough to do his will when the end result is everyone hates you and they treat you terribly. So anyway, Peter's reaction to this, and there's no doubt he had not yet wrapped his head around the fact that that's how it goes. And this is what he is a disciple to, is this path. You know, it's funny. Well, I'll just read the verse first. And he spake that saying openly, and Peter took him and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned about and looked on his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but the things that be of men. You see, going back, the cares and riches and pleasures of this life. Why? Because they cannot bring fruit to perfection. It's either or. These things cannot coexist. You either choose God or mammon. And mammon doesn't just mean money. You either choose God's way or Babylon. You choose the things that be of God or the things that be of men. And if you choose the things that be of God, you need to realize that you're choosing a path where most people will hate you. You say, well, most people don't hate most Christians because they're not real Christians. They're not on that path. They don't do what Jesus does in their place. They brag about how they don't have to because of what Jesus did. So Peter is fighting and saying, Jesus, you don't have to do this. You don't have to lose your life. You know, there's another way. And Jesus rebuked him. Why? Well, first off, Peter wasn't arguing here for the sake of Jesus. He was arguing because he didn't want to be killed as well. Now, he finally came around, so we're not going to pick on him. And he did much better than most other people would. So we're not going to pick on him. But that's the fact. So in 34, he continues, Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words, there's that words again, in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed, when he cometh in the glory of his Father, and with the holy angels. You have two paths to choose from. The one is where you get as much as you can. The scriptures call that to get gain. The other path is to give as much as you can. And that's the path of following Jesus. And in that path, it's going to be taken from you. An awful lot will be taken. But that's the price for everything else that the Lord will give you. And maybe what he gives you has some temporal value, but it certainly has eternal value. Maybe it will cost you the whole world, but you'll gain your soul. You'll gain eternal life. The price of eternal life is all things. The details of how that lays out are different in the life of each person that takes that path, because our circumstances differ. But the price is everything. And Jesus didn't mince words about that. There are many passages that say that. Now I want to zoom in on verse 38, and I want to talk about explicitly what does it mean to be ashamed of Jesus and of his words. It means to deviate from his example in any way. In any way. If you're not doing what he would do, if you're not thinking what he would think, if you're not feeling what he would feel, as far as you understand him to be, you are ashamed of him. And he will be ashamed of you when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Does this refer to an event? Yes. But it also refers to a process. Going back to something I already said here, your progress in the gospel is determined by how you react to invitations to improve. That's how he sorts between the sheep and the goats. There was a game on Price is Right that I refer to often enough that I should know the name of it, and I don't. But it was a board of pins, and they dropped a ping pong ball or something in the top, and as it fell from the force of gravity, it would hit these pins and then go left or right. And so as it fell through all the rows of pins, the ball might end up in a place very far away from the same left-right distance it was dropped. So they drop it in the middle. It might end up way far on the left. It might end up way far on the right. It might end up anywhere in between. And that's how we are. And the pins are life. The pins are invitations to improve. And with each one, you either do what God would do in your place as far as you understand, or you don't. Now, the pin situation is a half and half. It's a 50-50. But in life, the invitation to improve stratifies a lot further. Why? Because to do what you believe is best, that's one choice, and anything else is to turn away from God. And there are many anything else's. So it's not a 50-50. It's a straight and narrow way. The right choice is very rare if you're just picking randomly. It tends to be the hardest thing. That's one way you can find it. But the topic of what is good, that's a very large topic. So he comes in his glory, in the glory of his Father. That refers to the second coming with the holy angels. That refers to the second coming. But figuratively, that's happening all the time, because he's coming in the glory of his Father with the holy angels in every invitation you have towards improvement. Sometimes, quite literally, there is a holy angel showing you how to be better, and you get to decide how to react. But more often than not, you're not aware of all of that, and it just seems like a chance to pick up trash off the ground, or a chance to arrange your schedule so you have a little bit more time with your kids every day, or a chance to arrange what you do with your kids so it actually helps them become better people instead of just entertaining yourself or them. Maybe the invitation is taking a minute to think about what you eat and when and why, and to reorient that, at least slightly, for greater long-term joy. Maybe it's while you're doing a set of bench press at the gym and you realize that you're just not trying as hard as you could. Do you see? It's in every moment. And this is why Jesus says on several occasions, he says, pay attention because you never know when the master is going to come back. He wasn't just talking about the second coming. Every moment has the potential to draw you nearer to Christ, depending on how you react to it. Are you paying attention? Are you doing the best that you can? The best that you know? So coming full circle now to close this up, think about your life and think about all the little ways, and maybe big ways, that you're ashamed of Christ. In every moment, do you live fully up to your potential? Or are you scared of what other people might do or not do if you did? Start having greater courage to walk as Jesus would. And you'll find that he becomes a much more obvious companion to you in your life. While you actively reject him, that will not be the case. But as you draw near to him, he will draw near to you. And so I hope that you think about that today and tomorrow, and to continue to do that. And it's likely that it's going to cost you something and also a great deal. But that's the price for things that are worth much more than whatever you lose.